Love Supreme came in the middle of the 60s and really distilled the decade's themes of universal love and spiritual consciousness. It was one man's private vision, and yet had such a universal impact. Now, almost 40 years later, it has proved to be far more important than just a record, and has really reached far beyond just jazz listeners.
John Coltrane was one of the few people on the planet advanced enough spiritually to have complete empathy, which is the most elusive of the human emotions to attain. Complete empathy with what was going on around him. And he could see the world. And this music is a reflection of that empathy. And it is something to aspire to, spiritually, personally, and musically.
John Coltrane's Love Supreme, a beautiful and deep record to listen to. For some it's not easy sometimes, there's a lot of intensity there, but that sound is so passionate, so sincere. Coltrane on tenor sax, McCoy Tyner on piano, Jimmy Garrison on bass, Elvin Jones on drums. A perfect match, perfect team. Coltrane was the leader, but everyone put the music first. Many people who never listened to jazz have heard Love Supreme. It's one of those rare pieces of art that transcends an idiom, or a time, or a space. It's one of those pieces of art that starts as a personal statement, and so many others have found something of themselves in it, myself included. It's a private connection, one that's hard to describe or put into words. It's almost as hard as describing how the music sounds. You just have to hear it for yourself. In the next hour, Coltrane's friends and family and Coltrane himself help us to understand who he was and how he came to create such a beautiful and lasting statement. We'll get a little closer to John Coltrane and the making of A Love Supreme. I'm Mos Def. For saxophonist Branford Marsalis, Love Supreme was Coltrane's defining moment as an artist.
It's something when I was a kid, there was a friend of mine named Kermit Campbell. He was the piano player in my band called the Mighty Creators. And we would always talk about pop bands that we liked. And they would make a record. And then we would say, well, that's it. It's all downhill from there. And we would argue. And I remember Earth, Wind & Fire did a record called All in All. And when I heard that record, I said, well, that's it. It's all downhill from there. And Kermit said, no, man, they got stuff left. And every record they made after that, it was all going to be downhill, like a band gets to a goal. And then when you get there, that's it. And I think John knew that. You know, probably heard the tapes. He said, we ain't gonna never sound no better than this. And now it's time for me to reinvent myself again. Because he had done it 3 times. I mean, not many musicians have done that.
Branford Marsalis is one of the many musicians who has tried playing A Love Supreme with his own group. Seems easy. 4 musicians, strong melodies, clear structure. But that's only a part of what Coltrane put into the making of A Love Supreme back in 1964.
The essence of A Love Supreme, particularly the first movement, but I think the essence of all of his experience is the blues. And that is the X factor. If you don't really have an understanding of the blues and how it functions in jazz, you're going to have a tough time playing pieces like A Love Supreme. The bass line is actually, you know the song, the Muddy Waters song, Seventh Son?
On the 7th hour, on the 7th day.
You know, yes, you do. On the 7th hour, da-da-da-da-da, on the 7th day, da-da-da-da-dum. You listen to the bass line, that's do-de, do-de. It's the same notes.
Well, that's what makes Train so great, is that he came through the whole spectrum of the music. You know, he played in Navy bands. You know, that's one kind of music. His father was a preacher. You know, that's another kind of black music.
John Coltrane Quartet recorded Love Supreme in December of 1964, but the story started in the late 50s. Poet Amiri Baraka was right in the middle of it.
Then the whole rhythm and blues thing, you know, and Walking the Bar, the stomp down R&B funk. And so Train has part of that in it. In other words, he has a little bit of the Earl Bostic, but I'd say also a little bit of the kind of Big J McNeely screaming and crying in him, because that all comes up just before that in the 50s. And you see J McNeely falling on his back, you know, playing on his back, kicking his heels in the air. So that kind of complete, absolute expression. And so the whole thing about Walking the Bar was it was a kind of entertainment. That was all. It was, you could get closer to the audience, but also actually that Walking the Bar, I think, stirred up a kind of a deep emotional kind of thing. So everybody wanted to walk the bar. They couldn't all walk the bar, but they would definitely demonstrate that emotional kind of connection to that music. It was the direct transfer of that blues kind of cry, you know, into the saxophone that brought the 50s. And so then later you get people like, say, the Train. All they're doing is carrying that kind of motif into, another kind of context. Benny Golson would know, because you could tell, yeah, you should talk to Benny because he saw and heard Train do it.
Yeah, he got a job up at a place called the Ridge Point. It was a street where 3 streets crossed instead of 2. Yeah. And so this, where the club was almost like a big slice of pie. And the bar was made in the same shape. And they usually start at the big piece of the pie and walk down to the point and then up the other side. And I said, I can't believe that he's playing there, because this is a rock and roll place. And, the honkers play there. So a Saturday afternoon, I decided to go there. And as I opened the door, he was on the bar and right at the point of the pie. And he looked in my face, and I fell up against the door laughing. And he took the horn out of his mouth and said, "Oh, no," because I caught him on the bar.
Coltrane was a late bloomer on the scene. He was almost 30 when Miles Davis asked him to join his quintet. Coltrane made some great music with that group. But Miles fired Coltrane. He was slipping. Train's heroin habit started messing with his playing. Trey laid low for a while, kicked the habit, and got back on the scene. In 1957, he joined legendary pianist Thelonious Monk, one of my favorites, at the Five Spot Club.